Abraham was called out of the city of Ur in the Chaldees, Ur of the Chaldeans. That is what is now known as Iraq. So Abraham came from Iraq. God told him, come out from this city, from this nation that worships many gods. I am the one true God. Bring your family, all the stuff that you have. I'm calling you out of this world that worships many gods so that you may worship the one true God. God also makes a promise to Abraham. Abraham is 75 years old when him and his wife, who comes to be known as Sarah, when they leave Iraq. He's 75, she's 65. They've never had children. God promises Abraham that he's not only going to have a child, but he's going to be the father of many nations. About 12 years into the journey that Abraham and Sarah have begun, still no child. So Abraham and Sarah, maybe a little nervousness, maybe a little doubt, or maybe just that human instinct to think that God needs help, think that God needs our help to accomplish what He said He would do. They decide that what God must have meant was that Abraham was supposed to sleep with their 20-year-old servant Hagar. So he does that, and she conceives and bears a son named Ishmael. Ishmael is not the son of the promise, though. He's the son of Abraham's works, human works. Eventually, the child of promise is born, Isaac. Abraham's 100 and Sarah is 99. It took about 25 years from the day God promised to the day they actually saw the promise fulfilled in Isaac. After Isaac's born, there's a lot of animosity between Sarah and Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. Again, Ishmael is Abraham's firstborn son, and that's a big deal in that culture. According to their culture, it was Ishmael who had the birthright. That's a very, very prestigious place to be in that culture. The firstborn son gets the birthright, which means he gets most of the father's stuff when the father passes on. It's very beneficial to be the firstborn son and to have the birthright. But Ishmael was born out of Abraham's humanness. Ishmael was not the child of promise. Hagar and Sarah, there's animosity between the two, so Abraham eventually sends Hagar and Ishmael back to their homeland, which is now known as Iraq. The Muslims claim descent from Abraham through Ishmael. Muslims claim descent from Abraham through Ishmael. Jews and Christians, us, we claim descent from Abraham through the child of promise, who is Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah. And I am now in Genesis chapter 25. I'm going to start with actually verse 19. But remember, the firstborn son has a birthright. It's very, very important. Excuse me. We're in Genesis chapter 5, starting with verse 19. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean. Rebekah is also the sister of Laban. Laban becomes a pretty important character in our story. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, just like Sarah was. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife, Rebekah, became pregnant. Now, I am switching from the New International Version right now to the Amplified Version. Two children struggled together within her, or wrestled. Two children struggled together within her. And she said, "If it is to be so that the Lord has heard our prayer, why am I like this?" And she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "The founders of two nations are in your womb, and the separation of two peoples has begun in your body." Now God tells Rebekah something that he chooses not to reveal to Isaac, the father. He's revealing something to Rebekah, the mother, that Isaac isn't going to be aware of. The one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. The elder shall serve the younger. That's backwards. That's backwards in relation to human tradition. Isaac isn't aware of this. God tells Rebekah, the mother. Is motherly intuition real? Is that a truth, a real thing? You know, Mary, the mother of Jesus, knew much more about Jesus than Joseph did. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau, which means hairy. But he's also redhead, which, by the way, did you know King David was red hair? Did you know that? Esau means hairy, and this is important, but Esau is also known as Edom. He's also known as Edom, which means red. The descendants of Esau become known as the Edomites. That's important in the story. The descendants of Esau become what is known as the Edomites. They are trouble with the Israelites in the future. The first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came forth, and his hand grasped Esau's heel. They come out of the womb. They've been wrestling inside the womb. Esau comes out first. He's got the birthright. Jacob is holding on to his heel as they come out. So he was named Jacob, which means deceiver. The name Jacob means deceiver. That's very important. Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. So, we have a woman who is barren just like Sarah. Her husband, Isaac, just like his father Abraham, prays for her. She has twins. And God has revealed to Rebekah, the mother, the younger is going to be over the older. As a matter of fact, the older is going to serve the younger. But only Rebekah has this knowledge at this point. Jacob means deceiver. Esau, according to human tradition, has the birthright as the firstborn son. We come now in our story where Isaac and Jacob have grown up. They're young men now. And in Genesis chapter 25, verses 27 through 34, Genesis chapter 25, verses 27 through 34, the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, or in other words, favored Esau. Isaac favored Esau, the elder. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Isaac favors Esau. He has much more in common with Esau. Rebekah favors Jacob. Jacob's a man who stays in the tents. Esau is an outdoorsman, very rugged. Perhaps Rebekah favors Jacob because she knows something that no one else knows. Perhaps she favors Jacob because Isaac favors Esau. Nevertheless, one is favored by Isaac, that is Esau. Once again, God did not tell Isaac the future of these two. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I am about to die," Esau said, a little compulsive. "What good is the birthright to me?" That's a huge strategic error on Esau's part. He's treating the birthright lightly. What good is the birthright to me? But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, then he got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Huge tactical error on Esau's part. In Hebrews chapter 12, the writer of Hebrews gives us some advice. We must always remember characters and events in the Old Testament. It says in Scripture, characters and events in the Old Testament are there as examples for us. They are meant to be examples for us. In the Bible, there's a literal meaning that always carries with it some spiritual meaning as well. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 16 and 17, the writer tells us, "See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son." Sold his inheritance rights for a bowl of stew. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change of mind, though he sought the blessing with tears. So, let's go to Genesis chapter 26, back to our story. Genesis chapter 26, verses 34 and 35. When Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, who is a Hittite. He's not supposed to do that. The Jews have been told by God, do not marry these foreign women. Why? Because they worship other gods. They worship other gods. They do not worship the one true God above all others. They're not supposed to marry these Hittite women because they are pagans. And God says, they will turn your heart away from me. Esau, nevertheless, when he's 40 years old, he marries the daughter of a Hittite. In verse 35, they were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Their oldest son has done something that he knows he's not supposed to do. Most of us have heard of Samson. Who brought about Samson's demise? And Samson knew he wasn't supposed to marry someone from that nation because they worshiped other gods. Samson knew he wasn't supposed to do that. So, I'm going to be reading this story starting with chapter 27. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Now remember, Isaac can't see. He's about to die. Isaac said, "I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Isaac has no idea what's happened between Esau and Jacob, that Esau has sold his birthright to Jacob. Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. Remember, she knows God's told her something. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die.' Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." Well, what's our opinion of Rebekah at this point? Crafty. Very good choice of words. Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a man with smooth skin, and he's also a mama's boy." I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just an observation. "What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me." A mother's love. A mother's love. She's willing to let the curse fall on her. "Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skins. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Don't you think Isaac would know the difference between their voices, even though he couldn't see? Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn." And what does Jacob's name mean? The deceiver. This is just low down dirty. "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." Now something very, very important with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the fathers of the Jews that they give as examples. The Father gives the blessing, and when He's doing that, the Holy Spirit is speaking through the Father onto the Son. The blessing is very, very important, but it's also God-breathed. The blessing is through the revelation of the Holy Spirit. Whatever the blessing is will come to pass. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done what you told me." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God gave me success," he replied. Whoo! God helped me lie to you. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son." to know whether you really are my son Esau or not. He has a notion that something's awry. Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." Well, of course they are, because his mother put that goat skin on him. He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he blessed him. "Are you really my son, Esau?" he asked. "I am," he replied. Then he said, "My son, bring some of your game to eat, so that I may give you my blessing." Jacob brought it to him, and he ate. And he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him. Remember, she put Esau's clothes on him? They, both mother and son, have completely duped Isaac. Okay, so Isaac pronounces the blessing. Just as God told Rebekah when they were still in the womb, the older is going to serve the younger. We could ponder and talk about why God chose to reveal this to Rebekah and not Isaac. We could have a really long debate about that, but that's for another time. After Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn, Esau, who sold the birthright for a bowl of stew." He treated his birthright as though it were not important. "I am your son, your firstborn." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." You can't take that back. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Jacob, the deceiver. Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? He has deceived me these 2 times." Not only did Jacob deceive and cheat Esau out of the birthright, but he also stole his blessing. He took my birthright, and now he has taken my blessing. Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac answered Esau, "I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants. And I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Moving on down, Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near." He's about to die. "Then I will kill my brother Jacob." When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is consoling himself with the thought of killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban, the Aramean. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. But you know a redhead's fury doesn't subside. Look what Conor McGregor did the other day." Now, I know some of you, I can tell some of you know. "When your brother is no longer angry with you and forgets what you did to him," well, didn't she help? "I'll send word for you to come back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day? Now remember what Esau had done. He'd married Hittite women. Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living. So, Jacob has to flee to his uncle Laban's. Esau has sworn he's going to kill his brother Jacob. Jacob the deceiver gets with his uncle Laban, and he finds out that his uncle Laban is just as deceitful as he is, maybe even more so. And it's Rebekah's uncle. Does that just run in the family? Who knows? Now, I believe it says in your notes that on Genesis 27 verse 41, I believe that is in your notes. And then it says Genesis chapter 28 verses 10 through 15, God gives Jacob a promise. And then Genesis chapter 28 verses 20 through 22, Jacob's promise to God. That should be in your notes. I am in chapter 28 right now in Genesis, starting with verse 10. Now, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran, which is where Abraham and his family first settled when they left Iraq. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. A stairway to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. Look how God identifies himself. He says, I'm the God of father and the God of Ishmael? No. He says, I'm the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you, this is God's promise to Jacob, I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you. This is a pretty cool promise right here. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow saying, Jacob makes a promise back to God, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And all of that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Abraham gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything he had. Jacob promises to God, if you do what you said, God, I will give you a tenth of everything I've got. Well, we know God will do what he said. Now, In your notes it says 20 years pass and Jacob is returning to his father's homeland. He receives news that Esau is coming with 400 men to meet him. How would you feel if you were Jacob right now? He's coming with 400 men to meet him. Jacob sends half of everything he owns ahead to meet Esau, hoping to pacify him. Jacob stays behind and prays. Isn't that the way we operate? Man, I pray like the dickens when I'm in trouble. I pray like crazy when I've tried everything I can think of and it doesn't work. Man, I will pray so hard. And here's Jacob. We're now in Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 31. The good news is this is the last part of Scripture we'll be reading today. I will probably switch back and forth again between the NIV and the Amplified. Now remember, I have 4 different translations here, and I really like the Amplified in many cases because the Amplified gives you all of the different meaning for the Hebrew words instead of just one word, one translation. So, that night, remember, he sent everything ahead of him trying to pacify his brother. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man who is an angel of the Lord. There's many times in the Bible that an angel of the Lord takes the appearance of a man, and Peter tells all of us that it still happens. It still happens. Peter says many of us have entertained angels unaware. One of these days we're going to talk about if any of you ever come across someone that later on you thought, is that what Peter was talking about? I can tell you this, I was in a car accident and I saw what looked like a human being right before that car went off the cliff. And I came out unscratched. But that's a story for another time. You should really keep coming, Rob. Another ex-wrestler of mine. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Again, he's wrestling with God. They're wrestling until daybreak. This shows you that how Jacob is overpowered. They're wrestling till daybreak, and the man just touches his hip socket, and his hip is wrenched. And do you know that Jacob walked with a severe limp for the rest of his days on earth? He walked with a severe limp for the rest of his days on earth because of when God touched his hip socket. The man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Now, why would Jacob have that kind of boldness? He knows he's wrestling with supernatural being. The being, all he had to do was touch him in the hip socket, and his hip socket's wrenched. And the man who just did that to him to show him his power said, "Let me go." Jacob says, "I will not let you go until you bless me." Why would Jacob be so bold at that moment? Because God has made him a promise. And even though Jacob lies and cheats and deceives, even though Jacob does that, he knows that God will keep his word. So he says, "I'm not letting you go until you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" What an odd thing. They've been wrestling all night. He's wrestling with God. The angel of the Lord is a man. And Jacob says, I will not, and he says, let me go, it's daybreak. And Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And at that time he asks, doesn't that sound like an odd question? What is your name? Remember, with God, the question is always more important than the answer. Remember the question that God asked Adam when Adam hid behind the trees. God said, where are you? When God asks a question, He's asking us to consider ourselves. Really, in that question with Adam, God was saying, who has broken fellowship here? Where are you? Who's broken fellowship? It wasn't me, Adam. I'm not the one. You're the one hiding behind the tree. Where are you? And God asked Jacob, what is your name? And at that moment, Jacob has a revelation. I am the deceiver. I've cheated people my whole life. He cheated his uncle Laban, cheated his brother, lied to his father. He says, I am the deceiver. That's who I am. Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, who is the angel of the Lord, this is God, he said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. Israel means wrestles with God. But Israel, because you have wrestled with God and with men and have overcome. How has he overcome? How has he overcome? We're going to find out. Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. Because Jacob knew who it was. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. He limped for the rest of his days on earth. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Jacob has been in the presence of God. You cannot be in the presence of God without changing, without being changed. I know that for certain. You cannot be in the presence of God without being changed. Jacob carried with him a reminder for the rest of his life of his encounter with God. And you know what? You search the Scriptures after this moment. You search them after this moment. And I challenge you to find one instance where Jacob ever deceived anyone ever again. And God, from that time forward, when He gives His identity, He addresses Himself as, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, not Ishmael, and Jacob, not Esau. When Esau heard that his mother and his father despised the Hittite women, you know what Esau did in spite? He went and he purposely found one of Ishmael's descendants and married her. Out of spite. Now, the wound that heals. The wound that heals. The wise men from the ancients have always talked about the wound that heals. God gave Jacob a wound so that he could be healed. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life because he needed to be healed spiritually. God doesn't care about our physical body. It's not the physical that matters. Jesus says, don't worry about that. You worry about the second death. That's all that matters. God had to wound Jacob to heal him. I've been wounded, and it wasn't pleasant. But God in His mercy wounded me because I needed healing in a certain area. Where is your wound? Where is your wound? Wherever your wound is, that is where your genius lies. The wound that heals. You all have a ministry on earth. You all, God has a plan for each and every one of you on earth. Where your wound is, that is where your genius will lie. Where your pain has been suffered, that is where you will be able to ease the suffering of others. The wound that heals. Where is your wound? And if you can't answer that question, I encourage you to get into the presence of God and wrestle with God for a little bit so that He can reveal some things to you. Because again, we all have a ministry on earth. God has some kind of ministry that we are supposed to carry out individually. And again, I encourage you, the wound that heals. God had to wound Jacob to heal him, and that is where Jacob's genius lied. I've been wounded, and in that area, that is where I am able to ease the pain of others. And it's the same for each and every one of you. Wherever your wound is, that is the area that you will be able to ease the pain of others. Don't let your wound go to waste. Don't let your wound be wasted. Don't be like Esau. You have a birthright. You have a birthright. You have been blessed by God. You've been taken into His family. I didn't go over it today, but it's in your notes. Romans chapter 9, verses 10 through 16. Take that home and read it. You have a birthright. Esau chose the way of rebellion. He treated his birthright lightly. He despised his birthright. And he purposely did things that he knew would hurt his mother and his father. But in Hebrews, it tells us that Esau was godless. He'd been marrying foreign women way before that happened. And God tells us the foreign women will turn our hearts. And what He means by that is women or men, anything. The gender doesn't matter. Anyone who serves other gods will turn our hearts away from God. And then God will have to wound us to heal us. Esau chose the path of rebellion. He willfully did things that he knew he wasn't supposed to do. His wound was never healed. He never wrestled with God. He never got into the presence of God. And therefore God was never able to heal his wound. The wound that heals, that is what it was a blessed thing that God did to Jacob that night. Even though the rest of his life he walked with a limp. It was his healing. It was his genius.